My name is Celeste Harper. I am 32 years old, and the day after my wedding, I found myself standing in my own living room staring at my new mother-in-law as she calmly slid a stack of legal documents across my coffee table. Sitting beside her was a lawyer I had never met, his briefcase still open, and a notary ready to stamp whatever signature they could force out of me. Linda Carter didn't ask. She demanded that I transfer half of my company, Harper Tech, a company valued at $25.6 million, to her son, my husband. She acted like it was a done deal, like the moment I said I do, I had unknowingly handed over everything I built. My heart pounded, my throat felt dry, but I stayed calm, because what Linda didn't know was this. I was ready for them. When I think about where everything started, I always come back to my grandfather, Walter Harper. He was the kind of man who built something from nothing, launching Harper Tech from his garage when no one believed in him. While other kids played with toys, I spent my weekends sitting in his office watching him work and listening to his stories about business trust and the importance of protecting what you build. He would lean back in his worn leather chair and tell me that not everyone in life comes with good intentions. His voice always softened when he warned me to be careful, especially when it came to money and relationships. Harper Tech wasn't just a company to him. It was his life's work, his legacy, and he wanted me to understand every piece of it. By the time I turned 13, he put me to work in the mailroom, teaching me from the bottom up. Every summer I worked a different job, from customer service to accounting to marketing, learning every corner of the company with hands-on experience. I saw how he treated his employees, how he built trust not just with contracts, but with real care and fairness. He showed me that leadership isn't about control. It's about protecting the people who believe in you and building something that lasts beyond your own life. When I was in college, I spent nights brainstorming with him about ways to expand the company. I suggested shifting into cybersecurity, a risk he fully supported, and within 2 years that decision doubled our revenue. He didn't praise me with big words, but his proud smile said enough. Losing him to cancer when I was 29 left a hole in my life I didn't know how to fill. At the reading of his will, I learned he had left me 75% of Harper Tech. The rest went to longtime employees who had stood by him from the beginning. His lawyer, Frank Wilson, met with me afterward to explain the details. Frank told me my grandfather always believed I had the head for business and the heart for people, a balance that was rare. It was overwhelming to step into his shoes, but I promised myself I would protect his legacy with the same strength and caution he had shown me. I didn't buy flashy cars. I didn't live in a luxury high-rise. I stayed in a simple downtown loft, drove a reliable sedan, and made sure no one outside the company knew what I really owned. Keeping a low profile felt like a way to honor him, and it gave me space to live without attracting people who might see me as a target. What I didn't know then was how quickly that quiet protection would be tested. I met Matthew Carter at a charity gala on a crisp autumn evening. I wasn't planning to stay long, just wanted to make a quiet donation and leave. But something about that night made me linger. The room was filled with business suits and polite smiles, but Matthew didn't blend in. He was standing near the children's artwork on display, smiling with genuine pride at a painting made by one of his students. He told me he was a 4th-grade teacher at a local public school, someone who loved his job and believed in what he did. His passion was easy to see, and it drew me in more than I expected. I kept my introduction simple. I told him I worked in investment management for a tech firm. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I had learned to be careful about what I shared too soon. Matthew didn't push for more. He listened to me like what I said mattered, like he wasn't waiting to talk about himself. Our first date was at a small coffee shop tucked away on a quiet street. He insisted on paying, smiling as he pushed the check toward the counter before I could stop him. The next weekend, we spent hours hiking through a local nature preserve, talking about books, childhood memories, and our favorite teachers. There was something disarming about him, something that made me want to lower my guard. He was close to his mother, Linda Carter, and spoke about her with real tenderness. He told me she raised him alone after his father walked out when he was 10. She worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, put him through college, and gave up a lot to make sure he never felt abandoned again. His loyalty to her touched me. It reminded me of how my grandfather always valued family. When I met Linda, she welcomed me with polite smiles, but there was a sharpness behind her eyes I couldn't ignore. She lived in a small, carefully maintained house filled with family photos and furniture wrapped in plastic. She asked pointed questions about my family, where I lived, and whether my job paid well. I kept my answers vague and noticed how Matthew gently tried to steer her away from pushing too far. He told her that I wasn't on a job interview, but she brushed it off with a soft laugh. Despite those moments, Matthew and I grew closer. He surprised me with thoughtful gestures, always remembered small things I mentioned, and made me feel like I was finally safe to build something real with someone. Part of me still held back. I never told him about Harper Tech. I wanted to believe his feelings were for me, not for what I owned. I promised myself I would share everything once I was sure. Love, real love, needed a chance to grow without shadows. But even as we planned our future together, something about Linda's watchful gaze stayed with me. It whispered that maybe some shadows were already there. As the months passed, Linda Carter's questions about my life began to dig deeper. She asked about my salary, how much I had saved, whether I owned or rented my loft, and how soon Matthew and I planned to buy a home. She asked in ways that felt friendly, but there was a sharp edge under each question that pressed just a little too far. I brushed it off at first, thinking she was simply a protective mother, but the pattern didn't fade. It grew. When we talked about wedding plans, Linda immediately pushed for something grand. She suggested country clubs, high-end catering, and designer gowns. Each time I mentioned something smaller and more intimate, she waved it off as if I didn't understand what was appropriate. She reminded me that marriage was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and that we should celebrate it properly. She always circled back to the same point. Matthew deserved the best, and surely my investment job could support that. The more she talked, the more her words pressed against me. I began to feel like I was being measured not as a person, but as a financial opportunity. One afternoon, I stopped by Matthew's apartment while he was at work to drop off some documents he had forgotten. Linda said she would be dropping off a homemade casserole and had a key to his place. I arrived quietly and walked in just in time to see her in Matthew's home office, flipping through papers I had left on his desk. She jumped when she saw me, her hands scrambling to straighten the folders. She said she had accidentally knocked them over while dusting, but the papers had been stacked neatly in a closed folder. I didn't confront her. I just nodded, but inside my chest tightened. I told myself to be more careful. Later, the signs became harder to ignore. I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I had arrived early to Matthew's apartment and paused at the door when I heard their voices raised on the other side. Matthew was frustrated, asking Linda to stop pushing him about our finances. She insisted he needed to secure his future. She said that when people marry, assets should be shared. She said my money would naturally become family money, and that Matthew should talk to me about combining everything after the wedding. My hands trembled as I stepped back from the door. I wondered if Matthew had started to see me as a safety net, or if Linda was the one pulling all the strings. When I confronted myself that night, I realized I was starting to doubt the very person I loved. I wanted to trust him, but the creeping unease wouldn't leave me. I called my best friend Kelly and told her everything. She didn't hesitate. She told me to protect myself, that Linda saw me as a ticket to security, and that maybe Matthew did too. I hung up the phone with my heart heavier than it had been in a long time. I wanted to believe in love, but I could no longer ignore what I had seen and heard. Some lines had already been crossed. I just didn't know how far they planned to go. I sat across from Frank Wilson in his downtown office, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Frank had been my grandfather's lawyer for decades, and I trusted him with everything. I told him about Linda's questions, her constant pressure about money, and the conversation I overheard between her and Matthew. I asked him if I was overreacting. Frank listened carefully, his expression calm but serious. He reminded me that my grandfather had spent his life building HarperTech, and that he had trusted me to protect it. Frank explained the options I had to safeguard the company. We could create an irrevocable trust that would separate HarperTech from any future marital assets. He said we could draft a prenuptial agreement to further protect my ownership, but the trust alone would create layers of legal defense that no one could easily break. I hesitated, telling him that part of me still believed Matthew loved me for who I was, not what I owned. Frank didn't tell me what to do. He only reminded me that love and caution can exist in the same space. He told me my grandfather never shared full financial details with his own wife until they had been married for years. Frank said that trust is built over time, not given blindly. I drove home that afternoon with my thoughts swirling, caught between wanting to protect myself and wanting to fully believe in Matthew. That night I met Kelly for dinner. I told her everything about the trust, about what Frank advised, and about how I still wanted to give Matthew the benefit of the doubt. Kelly didn't hold back. She told me I needed to protect myself first. She said if Matthew loved me, he wouldn't care about waiting to combine finances. She said anyone who rushed that conversation didn't have my best interests at heart. I knew she was right, but it still stung to think this way about someone I was planning to marry. I stayed awake long past midnight, replaying every conversation I'd had with Matthew and Linda. I thought about the moments that felt real, and the small signs that now felt like warnings. I asked myself whether I was being paranoid or simply being smart. In the end, I made my decision. I called Frank the next morning and told him to move forward with setting up the trust immediately. I told him I wanted every layer of protection possible. I also told him to prepare prenuptial documents, even though I wasn't sure if I would ask Matthew to sign them. Frank said my grandfather would have been proud of me. I wasn't sure if I felt proud or just tired. I wanted love, but I needed to be safe. I promised myself that I would tell Matthew everything after the wedding. I would share the truth when I was sure our relationship was built on something solid. Until then, HarperTech would stay protected, and so would I. I told myself that this wasn't a betrayal. It was a necessary line of defense. Sometimes loving someone means protecting what you've worked for, even if it means waiting to see who they really are. The morning of my wedding felt like standing between two worlds. I loved Matthew. I wanted to believe in our future, but the weight of everything I had seen and heard sat on my chest like a stone. I tried to push it aside as I slipped into my simple, elegant dress. I had chosen something that felt like me, not the extravagant gown Linda kept pushing for. Linda had spent the weeks before the wedding controlling every detail, insisting on a venue that stretched our budget, and reminding me that I worked in investments, so surely I could manage. I told myself that after the wedding I would tell Matthew everything. I had built protections around Harper Tech, but I didn't want secrets to live between us. I looked at him at the altar, his eyes soft, his hands shaking as he held mine. His vows were filled with love and promises to build a life together. For a moment, I let myself believe that I had been wrong to worry. The reception passed in a blur of toasts, music, and stolen glances. Linda floated through the crowd, dropping small comments about sharing everything in marriage and the importance of unity. Each word chipped at my nerves, but I kept my focus on Matthew. I wanted this to work. That night, after we had changed and packed for our short honeymoon at a nearby lake resort, Linda stopped us near the door. She handed Matthew a sealed folder, smiling as if it were a thoughtful gift. She said it was just some paperwork to review later, nothing urgent. The next morning, the phone buzzed as we finished breakfast on the cabin's deck. Linda had sent a message saying there was a plumbing emergency at Matthew's apartment. She said the super needed him there right away, that water was everywhere. It didn't feel right. I asked why she couldn't handle it, why a plumber couldn't be called. Matthew sighed and said his mother insisted he had to be there in person. I agreed to go with him, though something deep inside me told me this wasn't about a leak. The drive back to the city was quiet. I watched the streets roll by, my stomach sinking. When we arrived, there were no maintenance trucks, no signs of water damage. The hallway was dry, the apartment silent. Matthew opened the door, and I stepped inside to find Linda already waiting, seated on the couch with a man I had never seen before. A young woman stood beside him, a notary stamp resting on the table. Linda smiled as if this were just another family meeting. She said there was no plumbing emergency. She said this was the real emergency, that as a family we needed to settle our assets now. The man introduced himself as an attorney. He slid a stack of documents across the table and calmly explained that they were papers to transfer 50% of Harpertech to Matthew now that we were legally married. My chest burned. My heart thudded so loudly I could barely hear the rest of his explanation. They had planned this. They had set me up the day after my wedding. Linda's words cut through the silence. She said families share everything. She said it was only fair that Matthew deserved security. I turned to Matthew, searching his face for answers. He looked panicked, his voice stumbling as he said he didn't know about this meeting, that he had no idea his mother had planned this. I asked him if he had talked to her about combining assets. He said they had discussed finances, but not like this. I couldn't tell if he was lying or if he had simply let his mother run wild. Linda grew impatient, urging me to sign, saying it was the right thing to do, saying I owed it to the family. My fingers curled into fists, my breath sharp in my throat. I looked at the notary, her eyes darting between us, clearly uncomfortable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, but I stayed still. I stared straight at Linda and felt something inside me shift. I had seen enough. I had heard enough. I would not be signing anything, and I would not be staying another minute in that room. I stood in the middle of Matthew's apartment and let the silence press against me. I looked down at the stack of papers on the coffee table, the attorney watching me like he was waiting for the first signature to drop. My heartbeat slowed, but my voice stayed steady as I told them I would not be signing anything. I told Linda I knew what she was doing. I told her the company was already protected by legal structures she could never break. Linda's smile faltered, but she quickly pushed the pen toward me again. She said I was overreacting. She said this was simply how families handled assets. I looked her in the eye and told her the company wasn't just a number on a page. It was my grandfather's life's work. It was mine now, and it would never be hers. The notary shifted nervously, her hands hovering near her stamp like she wanted to disappear. I turned to Matthew and asked him if he knew this was coming. He said he didn't know about the meeting. He said he had only agreed to talk about finances after the wedding, nothing more. I asked him if he had told his mother about my money. He hesitated. He admitted they had guessed I was more successful than I let on. He said they thought I might have savings I was hiding. I told him I never lied to him. I told him I protected my company because I had to, not because I wanted to keep things from him. He didn't say anything, but his silence told me enough. He had left space for this to happen. He had entertained his mother's suspicions instead of shutting them down. He had let me walk into this trap without warning. Linda's voice rose. She said I owed this to Matthew. She said he had been through enough in life to deserve security. I looked at her and said he deserved love, not a percentage of a company. I told her what she was doing was manipulation, not protection. She tried again, but I had already made up my mind. I picked up my purse and told them I was leaving. I told Matthew I needed time, space, and clarity. I told him I didn't know if I could come back from this. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for him to chase me. I walked out and left the weight of that room behind me. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if love could survive this. But I knew I had protected what mattered. And I knew I had protected myself. I sat in Frank's office the morning after I walked out of Matthew's apartment. The weight of what happened still pressed on my chest, but Frank's steady voice gave me something solid to hold on to. He told me the company was safe, that the trust we had built could not be broken by what Linda had tried. He said if I wanted to pursue legal action, I had grounds, but I shook my head. I didn't want a lawsuit. I just wanted answers. I told Frank that part of me still didn't understand why Linda would push so far, why she would risk everything for control. Frank reminded me that desperation makes people cross lines they would never dare approach otherwise. I thought about that as I walked home, the city buzzing around me like none of it had touched me. I stopped in front of Kelly's apartment and texted her to see if she was home. She opened the door and pulled me into a tight hug the second she saw my face. I told her everything. I told her about the papers, the ambush, the way Matthew's silence cut deeper than anything Linda said. Kelly's anger flared quickly. She told me Matthew should have protected me, that love without defense is no love at all. I agreed, but somewhere in the cracks of my frustration, a small voice whispered that maybe there was something more. I didn't know why Linda had gone to such lengths. I needed to know. 3 days passed, filled with unanswered texts from Matthew and flowers I didn't want to accept. He sent a letter, pages of apologies, claiming he never wanted any of this. He wrote that Linda had always been obsessed with financial security, that she never trusted people to stay, unless they were tied to something permanent. He said she had suspected I was hiding something, but he had no idea how far she would go. I almost threw the letter away, but Kelly urged me to read it again. She told me sometimes people lie to themselves as much as they lie to others. I asked Frank if it was worth meeting them face to face again. He said the decision was mine, but he would stand by me no matter what. I told him I needed the truth. I wanted to hear it from Linda's mouth. I arranged a meeting at Frank's office. I asked both Matthew and Linda to come, and I made sure they understood this wasn't a negotiation. This was about honesty. They arrived on time, Linda looking nervous for the first time since I had known her. Frank welcomed them in keeping the room calm but firm. I asked them why. I asked Linda why she had done it, why she had planned the ambush, why she had risked tearing us apart. For a long moment she said nothing. Her hands twisted in her lap, her eyes darting to the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than I expected. She told me she was drowning in medical debt. She had battled cancer 5 years earlier, a fight she never fully disclosed to Matthew. She told him the insurance covered most of it, but it didn't. She took out loans, credit cards, a second mortgage, all while pretending everything was under control. She said she had been terrified that Matthew would marry someone who wouldn't share financial burdens. She said she believed she was protecting him from the life of struggle she had known. Matthew looked like the ground had crumbled under him. He had believed his mother was stable, that the years of scraping by were behind them. He asked her why she hadn't told him. She said she couldn't. She said she didn't want him to carry the weight of her choices. I listened as her voice cracked, as the walls around her finally slipped. She told me the company wasn't just about money. It was her way out of a cage she had built herself. I felt something shift inside me. My anger didn't vanish, but I saw her clearly for the first time. She was not just the controlling mother who tried to steal my company. She was a woman who had spent years living in fear, drowning in numbers she couldn't fix, and clinging to her son as her only safe place. I still couldn't forget what she had done, but I also couldn't ignore the weight of her desperation. I told them both I needed time, that this wasn't forgiveness, but it was the start of understanding. I told them I didn't know what would happen to my marriage, but I knew I didn't want to keep walking forward with half-truths between us. Linda nodded, her shoulders finally slumping, as if she had been holding her breath for years. I left that room knowing the answers cost me something, but they also gave me something back. They gave me the full story, and that was the only way healing could ever begin. I thought about everything for days before I reached out to Matthew again. I wasn't ready to pick up where we left off, but I also wasn't ready to throw it all away. I told him if we wanted a chance at rebuilding, there would be rules. I needed a post-nuptial agreement. I needed us in couples therapy. I needed us to live apart for at least 3 months while we worked through the damage. I told him there could be no more secrets, no more half-truths. Matthew agreed to everything without hesitation. He said he would sign whatever I needed, and that he would show up for every therapy session no matter how hard it got. He promised to put me first this time, even when it meant creating distance from his mother. I told him it wasn't about punishment. It was about protecting what we were trying to rebuild. Linda stayed quiet during those months. She respected the space we needed. She started working with a financial counselor and a therapist on her own. She no longer called unexpectedly or pushed for updates. When she did reach out, she always asked if it was a good time. It was a small thing, but it mattered. During our separation, Matthew spent time at Harper Tech. I wanted him to understand what the company really meant beyond numbers and ownership. He shadowed my teams, learned the stories of the employees, and listened to the history my grandfather had built. He saw the weight of it, the responsibility I carried, and how much of my heart was tied to that place. I watched him slowly understand that Harper Tech wasn't just a financial asset. It was family. It was legacy. It was trust that stretched back across generations. He told me he had never fully seen it before. He said he finally realized why I had guarded it so fiercely. Therapy was hard. There were days when I wondered if it would ever get easier. Some conversations opened wounds I didn't know I still had. Other days I saw glimmers of what we used to be before everything cracked open. Matthew never missed a session. He never flinched when the questions dug deep. He stayed. After 3 months, I told him I was ready for him to move back in. We signed the post-nuptial agreement in Frank's office. There was no tension, no fight, just quiet acceptance that boundaries could exist without building walls. We didn't go back to who we were. We built something new, something shaped by the mess we had survived. I let Matthew into the parts of my life I had guarded. I showed him what HarperTech really looked like behind closed doors. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to protect the company from him. I wanted to share it not out of obligation, but because he had earned his place there. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And that was a beginning I could live with. 6 months after that day in Frank's office, Matthew and I moved back in together. The time apart had reshaped both of us in ways I didn't expect. We had spent those months in therapy, working through layers of trust and pain, slowly stitching our marriage back together with careful, honest hands. We didn't rush it. We didn't pretend nothing had happened. We built something new on top of the pieces we had left. Matthew found his place at HarperTech, not in the boardroom, but in the community programs. He helped design outreach projects that brought technology education to underserved schools. It felt right to see him working where his heart always belonged, helping kids, building opportunities, making a difference. His connection to the company wasn't about ownership. It was about purpose. And that mattered more to me than any signature ever could. Linda kept her distance in the best way possible. She went to therapy, attended financial counseling, and stayed committed to changing the patterns that had shaped her life for so long. She no longer called unexpectedly. She no longer pushed for involvement in our decisions. She asked permission before visiting or discussing anything personal. These small, steady shifts built something I never thought I would have with her. Respect. I didn't forget what she had done, but I found room to see her as more than the woman who tried to take my company. I saw her as someone who had spent years surviving, who had been crushed by debts she didn't know how to face, who had clung to her son too tightly because she was afraid of being left behind. I still guarded my boundaries. I still protected the company, but I no longer lived with the same sharp edges around my heart. One night after dinner in our shared apartment, I watched Matthew load the dishwasher while telling me about a new school partnership. The quiet rhythm of our life settled around me, steady and calm. I realized that protecting HarperTech had never been selfish. It had saved me. It had saved us. If I had not guarded it, I would have lost not just the company, but the chance to rebuild something real. Love, I learned, isn't about blind trust. It's about creating safe spaces where honesty can breathe. It's about drawing clear lines not to keep people out, but to protect what matters most. Matthew understood that now. I did too. The past would always be part of our story, but it no longer defined us. We were writing something different now, not perfect, not easy, but honest. And that was enough. That was everything. If you've stayed with me through this story, I'd really like to hear what you think. Would you have given the relationship another chance like I did? Or would you have walked away for good? It's not an easy question, and maybe that's why it matters. Sometimes the lines between love, trust, and protection can get blurry. I chose to stay and rebuild, but I know that choice isn't right for everyone. Please share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know what you would have done in my place. If this story meant something to you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I will keep sharing stories about hard choices, real love, and what it means to protect yourself. Thank you for listening to my journey. I hope it helps you trust yourself a little more.